The day Hannah Collins was told she had 48 hours to leave her apartment, she thought life couldn't possibly get any harder. She was wrong. Standing in the parking lot of a worn-down apartment complex on the outskirts of Columbus, Ohio, Hannah watched as the property manager handed her a final notice. Her hands trembled as she folded the paper and slipped it into her purse before her 8-year-old son could see it. Ethan was sitting on the curb beside their aging sedan, swinging his legs and holding a backpack that looked almost as tired as she felt. Hannah forced a smile and walked over to him. "Everything okay, Mom?" he asked. She nodded quickly. "Everything's fine, sweetheart." But everything was far from fine. She had spent the last 3 years working long hours after her husband walked out of their lives, taking on every job she could find just to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads. She skipped meals so Ethan could have seconds. She worked weekends so he could stay in Little League. She carried every burden alone and never complained. Yet somehow, despite all her effort, she was still falling behind. As if the day hadn't already delivered enough bad news, her car refused to start when she turned the key. The engine sputtered once, coughed, and fell silent. Hannah tried again. Nothing. She closed her eyes and gripped the steering wheel. The repair bill was the last thing she could afford. Ethan quietly climbed into the passenger seat. "Is the car sick again?" he asked. Hannah laughed softly despite herself. "Something like that." She stepped out and lifted the hood, even though she barely knew what she was looking at. The afternoon sun beat down as cars passed without slowing. Minutes felt like hours. Then she heard the sound of a pickup truck pulling into the lot. A man climbed out wearing faded jeans, work boots, and a gray mechanic's shirt with grease stains on the sleeves. He looked like someone who spent his days fixing problems instead of talking about them. "Need a hand?" he asked. Hannah hesitated. Pride had carried her through many difficult years, but pride wouldn't get her car running. "Only if you're sure," she replied. The man smiled. "I'm sure." Ethan immediately brightened. "Mom, maybe he's a real mechanic." The man chuckled. "Actually, I am." He introduced himself as Ryan Walker and spent the next several minutes examining the engine. His movements were calm and confident. Hannah watched as he diagnosed the problem faster than any repair shop she'd ever visited. After a few adjustments and a replacement part he happened to have in his truck, the engine came back to life. Relief washed over her. "How much do I owe you?" she asked. Ryan wiped his hands with a rag and shook his head. "Nothing." Hannah stared at him. "Nothing. Just consider it a neighbor helping a neighbor." For the first time that entire day, she felt something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. And neither she nor Ethan had any idea that the quiet mechanic standing in front of them was carrying secrets that would soon change all of their lives. Over the next few days, Hannah found herself thinking about Ryan more often than she expected. It was not because he had fixed her car. Plenty of mechanics could repair an engine. It was because he had helped without asking for anything in return. In Hannah's experience, that had become rare. Life had taught her that favors usually came with conditions attached. Yet Ryan had simply smiled, wished her a good day, and driven away. The following Saturday morning, Hannah was balancing her checkbook at the kitchen table when Ethan came running into the room. "Mom, look." He held up a flyer for a local community fair taking place downtown. There would be food trucks, games, and activities for children. Hannah glanced at the nearly empty numbers in her account and forced a smile. "Maybe next year, buddy." Ethan tried not to look disappointed, but she could see it in his eyes. A few hours later, after finishing a short shift at a grocery store, Hannah stopped at a small auto repair shop to ask about a strange sound her car had started making. The moment she stepped inside, she froze. Ryan was standing near one of the service bays talking with another mechanic. Ethan's face lit up instantly. "Mom, it is him." Ryan turned and smiled. "Well, look who it is." Ethan rushed over. Before Hannah could stop him, within minutes, the two were talking as if they had known each other for years. Ryan knelt beside him and listened carefully as Ethan explained every detail about baseball practice and his favorite science project. Hannah watched from across the garage. Most adults politely tolerated children. Ryan genuinely paid attention. It was a small thing, but it mattered. When Ryan inspected the car, he discovered that the issue was minor and fixed it in less than 15 minutes. Once again, he refused payment. Hannah crossed her arms. "You know this is becoming a habit." Ryan laughed. "Then I guess I need to find a way to break it." Before she could respond, Ethan excitedly mentioned the community fair. Ryan looked at Hannah. You two planning to go? Hannah hesitated. Probably not. Ryan seemed to understand immediately, though she had not explained why. I was thinking about stopping by myself, he said casually. Maybe I could save you a couple of spots on the Ferris wheel. The next afternoon, Hannah almost talked herself out of going. But Ethan had been excited all morning, and somehow Ryan had managed to leave 2 admission tickets waiting at the entrance. She still had no idea how he arranged it. For several hours, the 3 of them wandered through the fairgrounds together. Ethan played games, won a stuffed bear, and laughed more than Hannah had heard in months. As the sun began to set, they stood watching the lights come alive across the fair. Ethan held Ryan's hand on one side and Hannah's on the other. For a brief moment, the weight Hannah carried every day seemed lighter. She caught herself smiling without forcing it. Then she noticed something unusual. A black luxury SUV had pulled into the parking area nearby. A man in a dark suit stepped out and appeared to be searching for someone. When his eyes landed on Ryan, he immediately started walking in their direction. Ryan's expression changed for the first time since she had met him. It was only for a second, but Hannah noticed it. And suddenly, she realized there might be much more to the quiet mechanic than he wanted anyone to know. The suited man stopped several feet away and gave Ryan a respectful nod. Sorry to interrupt, he said. There is a matter that needs your attention. Ryan glanced toward Hannah and Ethan before answering. Not tonight. The man looked surprised, but quickly recovered. Understood. Without another word, he returned to the black SUV and drove away. Hannah watched the vehicle disappear. It looked completely out of place compared to the old pickup truck Ryan usually drove. Friend of yours? She asked. Ryan smiled lightly. Something like that. It was an answer that explained nothing, yet somehow she let it go. The evening ended with Ethan talking nonstop during the drive home. He described every game, every ride, and every joke Ryan had told. By the time they reached their apartment, Hannah realized she had spent an entire afternoon without worrying about bills, overdue notices, or the uncertainty hanging over her future. That alone felt like a miracle. Over the next few weeks, Ryan became a regular part of their lives. He would stop by after work with a pizza for Ethan or help carry groceries up the stairs when he saw Hannah struggling with heavy bags. Sometimes he simply showed up to check whether the car was running properly. Other times, he brought small tools and taught Ethan basic repairs in the apartment parking lot. Ethan loved every minute of it. One Saturday morning, Ryan helped him replace a broken bicycle chain. The smile on Ethan's face afterward could have powered the entire city. Hannah stood nearby holding 2 cups of coffee. She found herself studying Ryan when he was not looking. There was something different about him. He never complained. He never bragged. He never tried to impress anyone. Yet people naturally listened when he spoke. Even strangers seemed to trust him. One afternoon, while eating lunch together at a small diner, Hannah shared more about her past than she intended. She spoke about the challenges of raising Ethan alone and the constant fear of not being able to provide enough. Ryan listened quietly. He did not interrupt. He did not offer empty advice. He simply listened. When she finished, he looked at her and said, "You give yourself less credit than you deserve. Most people would not have made it this far." Those words stayed with her long after the conversation ended. No one had said anything like that to her in years. As summer moved closer, Hannah noticed Ethan changing too. He seemed happier and more confident. His teachers even mentioned that he was participating more in class. One evening, while Hannah washed dishes, Ethan sat at the kitchen counter doing homework. Without looking up, he asked a question that caught her completely off guard. "Do you think Ryan would ever want to be part of our family?" Hannah nearly dropped a plate. "Why would you ask that?" Ethan shrugged. "Because when he is around, everything feels better." Hannah could not answer right away. Deep down, she understood exactly what he meant. Later that night, after Ethan was asleep, her phone buzzed with a text message from Ryan asking if she wanted to join him for coffee the next afternoon. Hannah stared at the screen longer than necessary before smiling. For the first time in a very long time, she was excited about tomorrow. What she did not know was that while she was beginning to open her heart, Ryan was carrying a secret large enough to change everything the moment it came to light. The next afternoon, Hannah met Ryan at a small coffee shop near the riverfront. What she expected to be a simple conversation somehow turned into 3 hours that passed faster than she thought possible. They talked about childhood memories, favorite books, embarrassing first jobs, and dreams they had never fully given up on. Ryan asked thoughtful questions and remembered details she had mentioned weeks earlier. It was a quality she rarely encountered. Most people listened just long enough to respond. Ryan listened to understand. As the weeks continued, Hannah found herself looking forward to every text message and every unexpected visit. Yet alongside those growing feelings came something else. Questions. Small details about Ryan no longer seemed easy to explain. One Tuesday afternoon, Hannah stopped by the repair shop to bring lunch for him. As she approached the office, she heard Ryan speaking on the phone through a partially open door. His voice was calm but firm. Delay the acquisition until next quarter. We need a better long-term strategy. Hannah froze. Acquisition? Strategy? The conversation sounded less like a mechanic discussing repairs and more like an executive leading a board meeting. Before she could hear more, Ryan noticed her and immediately ended the call. Everything okay? She asked casually. Ryan smiled. Just helping a friend with a business problem. The answer seemed reasonable, yet something about it felt incomplete. A few days later, another strange moment occurred. Hannah was picking up Ethan from baseball practice when she spotted Ryan sitting alone in the bleachers. A man in an expensive suit approached him carrying a tablet. The two spoke quietly for several minutes. Ryan reviewed something on the screen and appeared to give instructions. The suited man nodded several times before leaving. When Ryan noticed Hannah watching, he walked over as though nothing unusual had happened. Good game today, he said. Hannah nodded slowly. Who was that? Ryan glanced toward the parking lot. Just someone from out of town. Again, an answer that explained very little. The mystery deepened the following weekend when Ethan convinced Ryan to join them at a local charity fundraiser. While browsing auction items, Hannah watched several influential business owners greet Ryan with surprising familiarity. One even shook his hand and said, "Good to see you again, sir." The word stood out immediately. Sir. Not buddy. Not friend. Sir. Ryan smoothly redirected the conversation before Hannah could ask questions, but the encounter stayed in her mind. Later that evening, as they walked through the parking lot, Ethan raced ahead toward the car. Hannah finally decided to address what had been bothering her. Ryan, can I ask you something? He looked at her. Of course. How many mechanics have people in expensive suits following them around? For the first time, she saw genuine hesitation cross his face. Ryan laughed softly, but it sounded forced. Probably not many. Hannah smiled. That is what I thought. Ryan looked away briefly before meeting her eyes again. There are parts of my life I have not talked about. Yet, Hannah felt her heart beat a little faster. Why not? Ryan seemed to search for the right words. Because sometimes people treat you differently once they know certain things. Hannah did not fully understand what he meant, but she could tell he was carrying a burden he was not ready to share. What neither of them realized was that the truth was already moving closer, and soon it would become impossible to keep hidden. For a while, life seemed to settle into a rhythm that Hannah almost trusted. She continued working long hours. Ryan remained a steady presence in her and Ethan's lives. And for the first time in years, the future did not feel quite so overwhelming. Then everything changed on a rainy Thursday morning. Hannah arrived at the regional office of the logistics company where she worked and immediately sensed something was wrong. Employees stood in small groups whispering. Managers hurried between offices with tense expressions. By noon, everyone was called into a company meeting. The announcement hit like a wave. The company had lost a major contract and would be restructuring. Entire departments were being eliminated. Hannah sat frozen in her chair as names were read from a list. When she heard her own name, her stomach dropped. After 7 years of loyal work, she was being let go. She drove home in silence, trying to figure out how she would pay rent, utilities, groceries, and everything Ethan needed. The numbers simply did not work. That evening, Ethan immediately noticed something was wrong. Bad day? He asked gently. Hannah forced a smile. Just a long one. But children often understood more than adults realized. Ethan nodded quietly and wrapped his arms around her. The next afternoon, Ryan stopped by and instantly sensed the change in her mood. After hearing what happened, he sat beside her on a worn park bench while Ethan played nearby. You are going to get through this, he said. Hannah laughed softly. That is easy to say when you are not the one staring at overdue bills. Ryan looked like he wanted to say more, but stopped himself. You are stronger than you think. Over the following weeks, Hannah submitted dozens of applications. Every morning started with hope and ended with disappointment. Some companies never replied. Others informed her that they had selected more experienced candidates. Savings that had taken years to build began disappearing faster than she imagined. Then another strange thing happened. Small financial pressures started easing in unexpected ways. A utility company informed her that a billing error had resulted in a credit on her account. A local scholarship program unexpectedly covered Ethan's upcoming school expenses. Even her landlord delayed increasing rent after initially planning to do so. The timing felt almost impossible. One afternoon, while waiting for Ethan outside school, Hannah received a call from an unfamiliar number. The woman on the line introduced herself as a recruiter representing a respected company in Columbus. She offered Hannah an interview for a position that paid significantly more than her previous job. Hannah could hardly believe it. After hanging up, she immediately called Ryan to share the news. He sounded genuinely happy. "I knew something good would come your way," he said. What Hannah did not know was that after ending the call, Ryan sat quietly inside his truck and looked at a message on his phone. The screen displayed updates confirming that every opportunity appearing in Hannah's life had been carefully arranged through connections he never intended her to discover. He wanted to help without taking away her dignity. Yet each favor brought him closer to a truth that could no longer stay hidden forever. The interview exceeded every expectation Hannah had. The company was professional, the position matched her experience perfectly, and for the first time in weeks, she left the building feeling hopeful instead of discouraged. 3 days later, she received an offer. The salary was better than her previous job, the benefits were excellent, and the office was only 20 minutes from her apartment. When she shared the news with Ethan, he celebrated as though they had won the lottery. That evening, Ryan joined them for dinner at a small family restaurant. Ethan proudly announced the good news before Hannah could say a word. Ryan's smile seemed genuinely relieved. "I told you something good was coming," he said. Hannah laughed. "You sound awfully confident for someone who claims to fix cars all day." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "Maybe I am just optimistic." Yet the strange questions surrounding him continued to grow. A week later, Hannah's new employer invited several recent hires to a networking event at an upscale hotel downtown. It was the kind of place she rarely visited. Crystal chandeliers hung from high ceilings, luxury vehicles lined the entrance, and business leaders filled the ballroom. Hannah felt slightly out of place, but determined to make a good impression. During a break between presentations, she stepped outside onto a terrace overlooking the city. That was when she saw something that stopped her cold. A helicopter descended toward a private landing area on the far side of the property. Moments later, several executives hurried toward it. Among them was Ryan. Hannah blinked, convinced she must be mistaken, but there was no doubt. She watched as Ryan stepped from a black vehicle and was immediately greeted by multiple executives. Their posture was different from what she had seen before. They were not speaking to him as an equal. They were treating him as someone important. Before she could process what she was seeing, one of the executives handed Ryan a folder. Another appeared to be waiting for instructions. Hannah felt her stomach tighten. None of this made sense. The man she knew spent his days repairing engines, wearing work boots, and helping Ethan with bicycle chains. Why would executives be surrounding him at a luxury business event? Before she could get closer, Ryan looked in her direction. Their eyes met across the terrace. For a brief second, surprise crossed his face. Then concern. Hannah immediately turned away. Her thoughts raced throughout the rest of the evening. When Ryan called later that night, she did not answer. The following morning, he sent several messages asking if they could talk. Hannah stared at the screen, but could not bring herself to respond. Every unanswered question from the past few months suddenly returned. The phone calls, the men in suits, the business discussions, the expensive connections, the mysterious favors. For the first time, she wondered whether she had ever truly known him at all. And deep inside, a painful possibility began taking shape. What if the person she trusted most had been hiding far more than a few details about his life? For nearly 2 weeks, Hannah kept her distance. She focused on her new job, spent evenings helping Ethan with homework, and tried convincing herself that avoiding Ryan was the right decision. Yet every time her phone lit up with his name, a part of her wanted to answer. Ethan noticed the change immediately. "Did you and Ryan have a disagreement?" he asked one evening. Hannah carefully chose her words. "I'm just trying to understand some things." Ethan lowered his head. "I miss him." The simple honesty in his voice made her heart ache. The truth was that she missed him too. Then, on a warm Friday afternoon, everything changed. Hannah was leaving work when she received a call from Ethan's school. His teacher explained that he had become dizzy during an outdoor activity and was being taken to a nearby medical center for evaluation out of caution. The teacher assured her that he was awake and speaking normally, but Hannah's heart immediately filled with panic. She left work and rushed across town as quickly as traffic allowed. During the drive, her hands trembled so badly she could barely hold the steering wheel. Without thinking, she called Ryan. The moment he answered, she broke down and explained what had happened. His voice remained calm. "I am on my way." By the time Hannah arrived at the medical center, Ryan was already there. She had no idea how he managed to reach the building so quickly. What happened next felt almost unreal. Staff members greeted Ryan by name. Administrators appeared within minutes. Specialists became available almost immediately. Every door that normally required waiting seemed to open. Hannah barely noticed at first because her attention was completely focused on Ethan. Fortunately, after several examinations, doctors confirmed that he was going to be fine. Dehydration and exhaustion had caused the episode, nothing more serious. Relief flooded through her so powerfully that tears filled her eyes. Ethan smiled weakly from the hospital bed. "I told everybody I was okay." Hannah laughed through her tears and hugged him. It was only later, after Ethan was resting comfortably, that Hannah stepped into a nearby waiting area and noticed several televisions broadcasting financial news. One headline immediately caught her attention. The screen displayed a photograph of Ryan standing on a stage before hundreds of people. Beneath the image appeared words that made her freeze. Ryan Walker, founder and chief executive officer of Walker Industries. Estimated net worth, several $billion. Hannah stared at the screen in disbelief. The report continued, describing one of the most successful business leaders in the country. Images flashed across the television showing private aircraft, corporate headquarters, manufacturing facilities, and international business conferences. It was him. There was no possibility of mistake. Every mysterious detail suddenly made sense. The executives, the helicopter, the connections, the influence, the resources. Ryan had never been an ordinary mechanic. As she stood there struggling to process the truth, two reporters entered the hospital lobby, discussing the unexpected appearance of the billionaire executive. One pointed toward the hallway where Ryan had disappeared moments earlier. Hannah felt the ground shift beneath everything she thought she knew. The man who had repaired her car, helped her son, shared coffee with her, and quietly stood beside her during the hardest months of her life was not who he claimed to be. And for the first time since they met, she did not know whether her heart felt more grateful or more betrayed. That night, after Ethan had been discharged and safely returned home, Hannah could no longer avoid the conversation she knew was coming. Ryan asked if they could meet the following evening at the small riverside park where they had shared countless conversations over the past several months. Hannah almost refused. Part of her wanted to walk away and never look back, but another part needed answers. The next evening, she arrived just before sunset. Ryan was already there waiting near the water. For several moments, neither of them spoke. Finally, Hannah broke the silence. "How long were you planning to keep lying to me?" The question hung heavily between them. Ryan lowered his eyes. "I never wanted to lie to you." Hannah shook her head. "You told me you were a mechanic." "I am a mechanic," he replied quietly. "I have worked on cars since I was a teenager. I still do whenever I can." Hannah crossed her arms. "You are also one of the richest men in the country." Ryan nodded. There was no denial left. No explanation that could erase what she had discovered. "Why?" she asked. "Why hide something that important?" Ryan looked out across the river before answering. "Because every time people learn who I am, everything changes. They stop seeing me. They start seeing the company, the money, the headlines. I wanted at least one part of my life to be real." Hannah wanted to stay angry, but the pain in his voice made that difficult. "And what about me?" she asked softly. "Did I not deserve the truth?" Ryan's expression tightened. "You deserved it. I just kept waiting for the right moment." Then he reached into a folder he had brought with him. Hannah immediately stiffened. She did not want gifts or money, but Ryan simply handed her several documents. "Look at these." Reluctantly, she opened the folder. The first document showed that Ethan's school expenses had been paid through an anonymous educational foundation. The second revealed assistance that had quietly prevented her utility services from being interrupted during her unemployment. Another showed support that had helped create the job opportunity she eventually received. Hannah stared at the papers in disbelief. "You did all this?" Ryan nodded. Not because I thought it would make you love me. Not because I expected anything in return. I did it because I cared about you and Ethan. Tears slowly formed in Hannah's eyes. Every unexpected blessing from the past few months suddenly made sense. Ryan continued. I never wanted you to feel like a charity case. You worked too hard for that. I only wanted to remove some obstacles when life became unfair. Hannah sat quietly, overwhelmed by emotions she could barely sort through. Betrayal was still there. So was confusion. But now another truth stood beside them. Ryan had never used his wealth to impress her. He had never tried to buy her affection. In fact, he had hidden the very thing most people would have displayed. For the first time since learning his secret, Hannah began seeing the situation from a different perspective. The billionaire executive might have been hidden from her, but the kindness, patience, and compassion she had fallen for had always been real. And as the sun disappeared beyond the horizon, she realized the most important question was no longer who Ryan was. It was whether she could trust her heart enough to believe that the man she knew had been genuine all along. The weeks that followed were not filled with grand gestures or dramatic declarations. Instead, they were filled with something far more important. Honesty. For the first time since they met, Ryan stopped hiding parts of his life. He answered Hannah's questions, shared stories about building his company, and admitted how lonely success had often felt. To Hannah's surprise, learning the truth did not make him seem larger than life. It made him seem more human. The billionaire headlines, corporate offices, and business accomplishments were impressive, but they were not what mattered most. What mattered was that Ryan still showed up to Ethan's baseball games. He still helped neighbors carry groceries. He still spent Saturday mornings repairing old cars because he genuinely enjoyed it. The man she had come to care about had not disappeared. He had simply been carrying a much larger story than she realized. Ethan adjusted faster than anyone. The moment Ryan returned to their routine, it was as though nothing had changed. One afternoon, while the three of them were walking through a community park, Ethan ran several steps ahead before suddenly turning around. Can I ask something? He said. Ryan smiled. Of course. Ethan looked unusually serious. Are you going to stay? The question caught both adults off guard. Ryan slowly knelt until they were eye level. If your mom wants me to, I am not planning on going anywhere. Ethan broke into a grin and immediately threw his arms around him. Hannah felt tears forming before she could stop them. Months earlier, she had been terrified of losing everything. Now she was watching her son find the stability he had quietly wished for all along. As autumn arrived, Ryan invited Hannah and Ethan to visit a lakeside property a few hours outside the city. It was peaceful, private, and far less extravagant than Hannah expected. They spent the weekend fishing from a small dock, roasting marshmallows, and talking beneath a sky full of stars. On their final evening there, the three of them sat together watching the sunset reflect across the water. For several minutes, nobody spoke. Then Ryan looked at Hannah. There was no ring box, no crowd, no photographers, no dramatic speech. Instead, there was only sincerity. For most of my life, he said quietly, people wanted something from me. You never did. You cared about who I was when you believed I had nothing. Hannah felt her heart tighten. Ryan glanced toward Ethan before continuing. I am not here to ask for perfection. I am not even asking for promises. I only want to know if you would give me the opportunity to keep being part of your lives. Before Hannah could answer, Ethan jumped in. That is the easiest question ever. They all laughed. Then Hannah looked at Ryan and saw the same man who had stopped to help a struggling single mother beside a broken car. The same man who had stood beside her during uncertainty, encouraged her when she doubted herself, and cared for her son as though he were family. Wealth had never been the reason she loved him. Character was. She reached for his hand and smiled. Yes, she said softly. I would. Years later, people would still recognize Ryan from business magazines and television interviews. They would still talk about his success and fortune. But inside the home he shared with Hannah and Ethan, none of that mattered very much. What mattered was family dinners, baseball games, weekend projects in the garage, and the simple happiness they built together. Because in the end, the greatest thing Ryan ever gained was not another company or another dollar. It was finding two people who loved him long before they knew how much he was worth.